Penang, UMNO had more seats than Gerakan. Technically, UMNO should have been Chief Minister, but they allowed Gerakan to do it. But the point is that that's why Khor Sukun was ineffective, because even though he was Chief Minister, UMNO had more seats than him, which is why the important portfolios were held by UMNO. Land, for example, land was essentially the biggest portfolio for a state government, because state governments really have control over local government, land and water, and religion. So land is obviously where you get your revenue and so on, and UMNO controlled the portfolio of land in Penang, right? So, and then you resulted in what we had, right? A toothless Chief Minister, which the people of Penang could not stand anymore, and they were very happy to get rid of him. Because that's why that's what happens when you have UMNO domination, and a very strong domination from the centre. And also we have a situation where Sarawak and Sabah are extremely uneasy as well with UMNO. I mean, we've seen statements from Chief Minister of Sarawak, and you go to Sabah, even many of the BN politicians as well feel very uncomfortable with how it's very centrally and UMNO dominated. So in Pakatan Rakyat, it's the same thing, right? Pakatan Rakyat, we basically had three parties with very divergent ideologies, but then, in coalition with each other, in a situation where I think most people would say a marriage of convenience, but it's also very imbalanced regionally. So, for example, I'll give the example of the state government of Kelantan. Okay, was the state government of Kelantan a PR, a Pakatan Rakyat government? To me, even though we labelled it as such, but how can it be? DAP has no seat in Kelantan. We don't even contest in Kelantan. PKR is one seat. So essentially, it's a past government. I don't even know why we were calling it a Pakatan Rakyat government. But because we had this permanent coalition that essentially enforced the idea of everything had to be Pakatan Rakyat, but it just didn't make sense. So in Selangor, it was a Pakatan Rakyat government, yes, because it was three parties, almost equal, and they were all very important and playing a role. But in Kelantan, DAP was not playing a role. In Terengganu, we don't even contest as well. Right? We're just non-existent in the East Coast. And in Penang, PAS is the one with one seat. So essentially, it's more of a PKR-DAP government. But of course, in the spirit of coalition, we also gave them many government posts in the grassroots level and in the religious level as well. But my point is this: was it fair to say Kelantan was Pakatan Rakyat? And at the same time, was Pakatan Rakyat relevant for East Malaysia? I think a lot of you also know that DAP in Sarawak, they were the first to say no, there's no Pakatan Rakyat in Sarawak. They were the first to break off a relationship with PAS in Sarawak, essentially because there is no PAS in Sarawak and Sabah. Yeah? PAS is very small presence. It's very hard for PAS to get in, because essentially even I think obviously the Bumiputra in Sabah and Sarawak as well, don't find the PAS message appealing. Right? So PAS is not a party that is relevant in East Malaysia, which is fine, but they're extremely relevant in the East Coast of Malaysia, Kelantan, Terengganu, and in the North, Perlis, Kedah, right? So what I mean is, my point is, regionally, things are not homogeneous, it's not the same, right? Not everyone, not every state is like Selangor, where you basically have the Malaysian mix, or Perak, which is also very, 60, 30, 10, and so on. But Sabah and Sarawak, not the same, right? Penang also not the same. Kelantan, not the same. Kelantan is 95% Malay. So, does it make sense to force the idea upon the other states? So, which is why, I think that was why, one of the reasons why we had a lot of tension, right? We were basically imposing values that were made up in the centre, agreed in the centre, upon the periphery, right? So you had essentially Pakatan Rakyat, the leaders at federal level agreeing to something, a common policy framework, but which maybe the PAS Kelantan does not feel that the values are the same as theirs. They may have their own values, and which is why they were trying to do Hudud in Kelantan, and all the while they kept saying, this has nothing to do with you, why do you keep insisting that we can't do it? And then at the same time, we get the blowback from it as well. People expect and say, look, why is PAS Kelantan doing something? So my point is this: should PAS Selangor be responsible for what PAS Kelantan does at the state level? Don't forget that PAS Kelantan was democratically elected with a mandate And everyone knows they want to implement hudud, right? The voters in Kelantan, they don't vote knowing, oh no, PAS, they're not going to do hudud. No, everyone knows. They were the ones who enacted the law in 1993 and later in Terengganu in 2003. So everyone knows this. But because we had this arrangement, that it just became, it didn't make sense. It didn't make sense, and the coalition became, there was so much tension in the coalition. Just people could not envisage the idea of having different policies. Yes, everyone subscribed to common policy framework. And essentially, DAP's problem with how hudud was handled was the fact that we were lied to. I mean, this is our stand. The fact that they promised to discuss it before tabling it, but they didn't. Both in the law that was enacted in Kelantan, as well as the private members' bill in Parliament, both were not discussed at coalition level before it was tabled. And at federal level, we certainly have a coalition, right? I mean, it's not fair for you to table a bill without discussing with us. So I think essentially that was DAP's problem, right? But also the Malaysian electorate, because they expected. I think it's something that because we've been so used to the idea of permanent coalitions, we're so used to the idea that everyone has to be the same, that people in Penang or everywhere else were also very upset. Why is Kelantan trying to do this and so on and so forth? But in an actual multi-party democracy, and especially in a federation. Okay, Malaysia is a federation. We've got federated states, and each state obviously has their own legislative assembly. And if a state wants to pursue a legislative reform or a legislative means of doing something, they should have the right to. But it's also our right, because then we have the question of whether it's constitutional or not. Of course, my opinion and DAP's opinion is that it's not, but that can be challenged in court. So, in an ideal democracy, Kelantan would have enacted hudud, they would have tried to implement it, and then DAP and PKR, for example, can challenge it in court and stop it from being done, and let the courts rule on its constitutionality, right? Ideally, that's how a democracy should function. But Malaysians, just could not understand this kind of concept. But I think now there's a chance for us to do something different, right? So, which is why I'm now talking about a new political configuration, right? And basically, it is in line with decentralization. I'm talking about political decentralization. I mean, we talk about fiscal decentralization, we talk about administrative decentralization, we talk about decentralization in education, decentralization in local government, and so on and so forth, but no one has talked about political decentralization. And I think this is something that I want to propose here today, because essentially each region has their own aspirations, has their own ideals, has their own interests, and has their own values. Right? The values of the East Coast Malaysians are very different from the values of the West Coast Malaysians or the East Malaysians. So, and in such a situation, we should have non-permanent contractual coalitions. I'll explain how this works. So, I just came from Germany, I told you guys earlier, and in Germany is a great example of how this works. So in Germany, they are a federation as well. So they're made up of 13 states and 3 federal cities. So it's 13 plus 3, 16. So somewhat like us. And so at the federal level, they have a government. And the party in power right now is a coalition government of the CDU, the Christian Democratic Union, and the SPD, which is the Social Democratic Party. So CDU, SPD, coalition government. But at state levels, it's all different. So in the state of Brandenburg, for example, SPD is in the governing coalition with the left party, Die Linke. In the state of North Rhine-Westphalia, SPD is in coalition with the Green Party. In the state of Hessen, the CDU is in coalition with the Green Party. And this is right-wing party and completely left-wing party, right? But still able to form a coalition at the state level. But in the federal level, they don't get along. They completely oppose each other's policies. But at the state level, as far as the state government is concerned, because they have formed an agreement, a coalition, they managed to work it out. And it's very interesting that although we all know, Mrs. Merkel from the CDU, and CDU has been the most dominant party for the last 3 elections in Germany, but did you know that the SPD actually has more numbers of minister presidents? Minister presidents are military personnel, chief ministers. SPD actually has more chief ministers. But at the federal level, they don't have nearly as many seats as the CDU. So it's a very interesting concept where enemies at the federal level can be partners at the state level, enemies at the state level can be partners at the federal level. It's extremely interesting. But how is this possible? How do you hold parties together that have completely different ideologies? Right? Green Party and CDU, very different. CDU is a right-wing, it's a conservative party. Green Party is very left-wing. It's very environmentalist, it's very and so on and so forth. But yet in Hessen, for the first time, they're in coalition together in the state of Hessen. You know, at a federal level, they just hate each other. How is this possible? Basically by having proper coalition agreements. Essentially a contract. It's black and white. It's stated very clearly, these are the things we're going to do in this term as a government. These are the things we won't do. And this is made public. And everyone signs. And if anyone breaks this agreement, then it's very clear. You know who broke it, right? So what I'm proposing essentially is to have some kind of similar arrangement in Malaysia where at state level, at different states, different regions, and at federal level, you can have different coalitions. Because it's far more pragmatic. So, you know, for example, in East Malaysia, you could have you know, some kind of arrangement between the parties there. You know, there's PKR, there's DAP, there's all those other parties, PBB, and so on and so forth. And in Selangor, okay, perhaps you want to have the three-party arrangement. PKR, PAS, and DAP, because it works very well. There are three parties of almost equal strength. In Penang, it's essentially a PKR-DAP government, but you know, it's up to them as well. If the PAS elected representative wants to sign on to the coalition agreement in Penang, then they should also have the right to, and they can be part of the government. So I think that's what we're talking about. Transparency. As long as the public can see and know what to expect, then it can work, right? And you can't have a coalition where people don't know what to expect. And the problem is when we had one coalition agreement and trying to force that down the throat of everyone in the whole country, it just didn't work. That's why Pakatan Rakyat never worked. BN works because UMNO is so dominant, right? UMNO is so big, the other parties have so little seats, we have no choice. They all depend on UMNO for patronage, for positions, for cabinet seats, and so on and so forth. Then they have no choice but to listen to Big Brother, right? But even that is unsustainable, right? What can work better is if you make the contracts clear and public, right? So at federal level, for example, just throwing out ideas here, you can have PAS, PKR, DAP agreeing to some kind of parliamentary agenda, right? So these are the things we'll do in Parliament, and these are the things we won't do. And if everyone agrees, then that should be the agreement for the coalition. And this coalition is not permanent. You can change it next election. You can have pre-election coalitions, post-election coalitions. I mean, anything's possible. And politics, when politics is pragmatic like that, it becomes less extreme as well. Why? Because the party you're fighting with today could be your coalition partner tomorrow. So that will force you immediately to moderate. You're not going to be extremely vile and racist when you attack them, because you never know, they could be your partners. And they could be your partners in a different state, for example. So that would sort of force people to moderate themselves. I mean, this is an idea to think about. And so the advantages essentially forcing moderation. It's less polarizing as a result. It's much more pragmatic. It's also much more democratic because it really reflects the aspirations and values of each region, right? So if in the East Coast they have their own coalition, if PAS wants to have a coalition with UMNO in Kelantan, for example, then go ahead. If that's what the people also can agree to. You know, if the voters can accept that, and if they want to come up, they want to come together and sign an agreement, then why should we not allow that, right? If we want to be truly democratic. I mean, what I'm trying to propose here, I'm throwing this idea out because I want people to start talking about it. I'm not saying that that's exactly how we should do it. It can be any kind of combination or any kind of, with what we have right now. But I think using the breakup of Pakatan Rakyat and the fact that BN is now on the verge of implosion, I think it's an opportunity for us to take that step forward, to move away from the past, to move away from a structure that just didn't work. I mean, we are a federation of states, but nothing in Malaysia suggests that we are a federation except for its name. Everything is run from center. Everything is run centrally. Even the parties are run centrally, right? So if we want to be more democratic, we should have decentralization political decentralization. We should allow regional interests to show itself, to reflect, and in this way also, smaller parties become more relevant. Now, I'll give you an example. There's a party in Germany called the FDP. They lost very badly in the last election, but they've been very strong in many other elections. Now, a very small party. They've never been able to have enough to rule any government, but essentially they have been in more numbers of coalition governments than any other party in Germany. So basically, when SPD became coalition government, won the election, they became government, they also became coalition. FDP would join them in the coalition, and they would also join the CDU in coalition when it was the CDU instead. So it was a very pragmatic party. It was a very small party, yet their interests could be represented, and they had the opportunity to be relevant because you had a non-permanent arrangement. And if you look at Malaysian, in a Malaysian context, if you recall, especially those who are a bit older will know, there used to be, well, there is still the PPP party, which doesn't win any seats in the general election, but in the old days they were very strong in Perak. Okay, but after they joined Barisan Nasional and it became part of the whole federal coalition and they expanded, they just could not go anywhere else. But if you had this kind of arrangement where they could be relevant only in Perak, so you have these more local-based parties to emerge, you know, this is very healthy. And essentially, the people in Perak chose PPP because they fought for the interests of local interests very well, right? And so this kind of arrangement would allow many new iterations and very much more pragmatic politics in Malaysia, less polarizing. So, just to sum it up, essentially, you know, Lim Kit Siang first started talking about a Save Malaysia coalition, a post-PN, post-PR scenario. He did not really flesh it out in detail. He was just, he was trying to provoke people to think. And I think that provoked me to think. And this is what, you know, this is some of the ideas that I've come up with as a result of this thinking. And I think there's opportunity in crisis. Yes, we're going through an extremely painful transitional phase in our country, but I think it's opportunity. And I think it's time, it's a really good time if we can get everyone talking about this, that, you know, we could take this next step forward towards becoming a much more mature democracy. So, okay, about 40 minutes of talking. Why don't we do Q&A and, you know, we'll take it forward from there. I'll take any questions on this topic or on any other topic you want to talk about. I'm happy to answer any kinds of questions. So, thank you very much for listening.
Talking about your federal and state combination in Germany, I think, you see, Germany is a different example. Simply because they are politically more mature, the electorate. They can understand, differentiate between state level and federal level. You go to a kampung person and tell him that, you know, for state you can vote this, and for the federal level we vote that. I mean, they can't comprehend that differentiation at stake in Malaysia. And secondly, our parliamentary system is based on UKIP. And I know it's not easy, but it has its faults too. But we sometimes just go with what we know from the past, rather than looking to, you know, make it suit our people and our system. So I think your idea is good, but I think it'll take about another 10, 15, 20 years for maturity level to reach where this can happen.
Okay, I'll respond to that. Well, I think 10 to 15 years is a good timeline. But if you don't start now, you never do it. But I would also like to address the point of Germany being a politically more mature society. Actually, it's only 25 years old, the democracy. This is the 25th year of German reunification. So essentially, the whole of Germany has only been democratic for 25 years. They are a very young democracy. And even West Germany essentially only became democratic after World War II. After a very painful experience in World War II, so 1948, which is only, you know, 9 years before us, 1947. So I disagree with the fact that, you know, that Germany is a very mature democracy and so on and so forth. They're not. Everyone assumes, even me, you know, until you suddenly realize, wait a minute, they were not. You know, you had authoritarian, you had dictator ruling Germany. They were trying to conquer the world, but essentially after that, it was only after that they became truly democratic. So they are not, like America has been democracy for a long time, yes, the UK, but Germany is not. So Germany is not actually, which is why it's actually a more relevant example for us as well. But I agree that obviously the election system is different. It's different. They have a mixed member, proportional representation system. Ours is first past the post, just like the UK is more Westminster. But yet we also have state and federal level elections. And I would think, yes, I agree with you that Malaysians are not used to it, and maybe they just cannot comprehend it if you try to explain it to them like this, But I think now with the crisis, there's an opportunity to actually do it. I think Selangor could be an example of the first state that we could do a contractual coalition, where basically the government there sits down and comes up with the agenda for the rest of this term. And every state assemblyman who signs it, or every party who signs it, then becomes a party to the terms of this coalition, and it's a Selangor coalition. So I think if that happens, and we still don't know what's going to happen in Selangor, right? They said now it's going to be after Raya, which they decide, but I think if that can be the outcome, then you're going to see the birth of such a system in Malaysia. I think it's very exciting.
I hope you're right.
I hope so too. Ben?
Can you run a country according to a 6th century book?
Sorry?
Can you mix politics and religion?
Can you mix
when you run a state, or the country of the state, and you keep religious, what it is in the book, irrelevant of what religion it is?
Okay. Tell you what, let me compile a few questions, collect a few questions, then I'll answer. It'll be easier. Yes, Farouk.
Thank you very much. That was a very informative talk there. I wanted to ask you, political parties are not just instruments of political compromise, they also have inherent ethics, I would think. And as far as I understand, in the DAP, the DAP represents people regardless of race or religion, whereas the political philosophy of the past, I'm not sure what PAS is like, but the former PAS, is that it would actually co-opt people based on their particular race, religion, into their legal system. Would you then say that it's ethically acceptable for you to have a coalition with these people at any level?
Okay, any other questions? Yes, yes.
Yeah, I have a question here. I know it's a tough job to sort of for this question, but is it a possibility of all the